being very topical and relevant with what's happening currently in the country. Just so that those of you who may not be aware of, yesterday the Supreme Court passed a landmark judgment essentially recriminalizing homosexual activity or homosexual sex behavior. So I think it's a very important time for us to have this discussion, especially given the theme of this panel. It talks about boundaries between nation states and the individual's personal homes. So where are these boundaries that we can draw? The barbed wires of the boundaries that have impaled so many human lives. So these might be not just real physical boundaries, but also these metaphorical ones that we talk about. So I'm here with an esteemed panel, and I'm really, really curious to get on this discussion started. So first of all, I want to ask each of you why you got into the space of human rights advocacy. What about it? Is there a personal story that motivated it, or is it something that you just believe that there's a social angle to it that you need to be involved in? So I'll start with you, Vaidehi.
Well, in my case, there was a long process and a short process. Long process was the fact that, as a Bombayite, I had been seeing this, change within the space itself, and the disappearance of certain spaces. As somebody who lives very close, or who has lived very close to the Gautans, I was seeing those spaces disappear as well. Specifically, I'm interested in how oral history addresses absence and memory and disappearance. Okay. So it all sort of came together in 2009, and the long process and the short process kind of came together. I would say it's more personal than anything. It's seeing a city that I'd grown up in, seeing a city that I love, changing for good in some ways, but also seeing a lot of things about it that I love disappear. For example, the way this community conducted its cultural life.
Right. That's interesting. Mr. Shroff, is there a personal story behind?
Oh yes, certainly. I started writing, I think, in the year 2001. And initially when I started writing, I wrote for reasons that most people write. I wanted to own intellectual space. I'd grown up with books. And the kind of more I wrote and the more I would visit bookshops, I would get depressed because I said there's too much writing. And at the same time, I stumbled upon this whole anecdote about how Steinbeck came to write Grapes of Wrath. That he'd first written it as a satire, and then when he actually went into the labor camps and stayed with them, he found situations very different. And that was a sort of awakening for me, because I realized that, I was a classic South Bombay guy. I didn't know how the other half lived. So I started going to villages and spending time with tribals, looking at certain migration patterns into the city. And that's when I came back and I threw out most of my work and I started writing issue-based, character-based fiction. So my whole realization was that, basically there are three kinds of people in the city. There are the haves, there are the have-nots, and there's a third category which is even more dangerous. They're the know-nots, like I used to be. So my whole role then became to sensitize the know-nots to the way the others live. So that's how my whole interest started.
Do you think that there is something that's changing? Is there an observation that changed from when you began to when you finished writing your works, to in the way in which you saw these?
On a personal level, tremendously. It started my own sensitization process. I would never be the person I am right now if I hadn't made that journey. It took me 6 years to write my first book, and there's a tremendous sense, because I was working completely out of my milieu. I was working with communities like Dhobis, Victoriawalas, Taxiwalas, Belpuriwalas. I was looking at all the heritage traits of Mumbai, and also looking at what issues affect them. So naturally, that leads to tremendous sensitization.
I would like all of you also to comment on each other's statements, but Mr. Benavgood.
One of the major concerns that I try to show in my work, as a painter, as a writer, is the homogenization. It's a major concern of spaces, and a singular narrative that is creeping in, where we actually have multiple narratives, and we are trying to force that. And this last film was very shocking, and because you see the head of a government, when the metamorphosis of a person who's a human rights activist, who becomes a president, who becomes a genocidal mass killer. There's a lesson in this. In our very own country, something like this is happening right now. The person didn't start off as a human rights activist, far from it. But what I fear is about to happen is a reshaping, a restructuring, re-engineering of history, of another narrative which is being us, as what Jerry was talking about yesterday. I mean, it's not just a particular party doing this. This is a wave. This is a climate in this country that is affecting us all. The Section 377 and all that. We can see it happening right in front of our noses. We are heading towards a very, very bad place, folks. We are there. You know.
Right. So I understand what you're getting at, but I also want to explore the mechanics of this. There is, in one sense, you're talking about government force or some kind of a government agent being, kind of overstepping its bounds and boundaries. But I want to get both of your observations as artists and as writers. What do you think are these mechanics of force?
I think it's a complete manifestation of power. It's like power which becomes indigestible. I don't know if you're aware, but I went through serious litigation on my own book. And what I realized is there's a very, very sinister agenda at work. So there's complete realization of how they can annihilate you, that a voice should be suppressed, they feel a certain sense of territorial insecurity, and this whole thing that we can use the machinery to squash the individual, and subsequently send out a message to the rest of society.
Personally, I'm not an activist, so my experience has been mainly with people I've worked with in my films. And it was very interesting what you said earlier, which was about being, a not knowing.
A know-not.
Because a know-not, right? Because I think that, for me as a filmmaker, that is a lacuna that I
Need to fill.
And I think that is just as vicious as, the reason why the government or anybody else can do any of this is because most of us don't really know anything about it. If you ask the random person on the road, what do you think about a bridge that will connect people, in the Gorai Manori region to a hospital in mainland Mumbai? They'll say, oh, I think it's wonderful. But what they won't think to ask is, why would the government not just build that hospital right there where the people can access it? Why would they need to build a bridge that's 4 times the cost? Maybe that has something to do with the fact that a bunch of other people will make money out of it, and it has really nothing to do with
providing access to
access.
healthcare.
So I think not knowing or being a know-not is, I think, for me personally as an individual and as somebody, as a citizen, I think that to me is the worst of the lot of it, because not knowing allows somebody else to hijack my rights, to hijack my opinion, my vote. So for me, that's what I see, and for me, through my film, that's what I try to fill as well.
And also, I think as a creative filmmaker, there's a lot more impact and force in the delivery of your message.
Yeah.
But therefore, isn't there a heightened sense of responsibility to get that message right?
It's good to begin with a certain parenthesis that this is what I can do. This is how much I can do, and it's possible. And to convey to the audience at all times that this is my interpretation of what's happening. This is that person's, because film is subjective and it's also manipulative. Whether or not I intend to start out that way,
That's right.
whom I choose to speak to, how I place my camera, how I edit. I may start out with this wonderfully, perfect desire for authenticity, but
Right.
what I see is not
Right.
authentic. It is illusion. All representation is artificial.
And all representation comes in a frame, so to
It
speak.
comes in a
There's
frame,
something that gets
parenthesis,
explained.
there's always that parenthesis, and
Right.
I think that it's my responsibility as well to convey that parenthesis exists.
But that's, I think, my question as well, that I think we should explore a little bit more. Where are we going to be drawing the line that says these are issues that are clearly wrong, that the government or these agents, whoever we think are like the wrong, the people who are like aggressing, the aggressors, and where perhaps there is a different point of view, perhaps we haven't given them a fair voice,
Yeah,
perhaps there is a
for
different
sure.
perspective.
For
So
sure.
do you, as artists, as people who are writing, creating works around these things, do you find that difficult, that maybe you haven't really investigated enough, known about this enough, perhaps your own biases get introduced into it?
One of the major things that we have to realize is that the biggest statist, the biggest collectivist myth is that the government is a benevolent entity. It is not. It is the government that, like Janus, eats its own children. You see, the government is not a benevolent entity.
Is government even meant to be a benevolent or a malevolent agent at all, or is it supposed to act in a certain way, not act, be an observer? Is it supposed to intercede on behalf? Is it not?
Ideally, it should be like a night watchman. Take care of
A chowkidar.
It is certainly a custodian, isn't it? I mean, the legislature is certainly custodian of our rights.
It has no business in our beds, in our bedrooms. It has no business in our businesses. it's just supposed to be a night watchman, and that too for the time. I'm being a minarchist here.
No, I would like your view on
Well-
that because, yeah, there are certain communities that you're talking about
Yeah.
which may not have their own voices
Exactly.
empowered. So, what do you think?
I definitely don't believe in a nanny state for sure. I mean, there are places where the government doesn't belong,
Sure.
right? Very obviously. But we do have a social contract with our government. We do vote them in, and there are certain things that you don't expect. Corporates are there to make a profit, and the bottom line is really what matters. But with corporates, the government decides to randomly take people's land away. You know, who are those people supposed to go to? It has to be the government. And when that doesn't happen, what are they supposed to do? So to that extent, I do believe that the government
But there
there
are
has to be
cases
accountability.
also where the government is the one doing the land grabbing.
Oh, for sure.
Where the
For
government
sure.
is the one promising the land of farmers or poor communities to the corporates.
For sure.
And so therefore as artists, when you're now framing these issues, this is why
Goa.
we were talking about,
Goa being a
Right.
very good.
right, or
example.
even in the northeast. But it is a very challenging topic to consider because yes, there are these communities that are not empowered. They don't have their own voices. And were it not for the media, I mean, if like the media has no interest or no any kind of, like their own stake in the game, they're not going to bother to go to these remote places and cover a story. So those communities do need have to
And-
have their voice heard.
And Jerry, the worst is that these stories are not tracked later.
They're not
So
tracked
why-
exactly, so they
that
make
is-
one day.
So
and
they
that's
just
it.
dissipate eventually.
Right,
You know?
and so then that's when we get films and movies that are being made or books being written that have slightly more enduring appeal,
Right.
that slightly stay longer in the social conscience.
With somebody like, say, the fishermen who are working off of communal property, right? The ocean belongs to everyone, the sea belongs to everyone. When you put a boundary on something like that, and how do you, in all ethics, put a boundary on something like that and say, now this belongs to, we are selling it, and we are selling it to this particular corporate house, where for hundreds of years, it's belonged to everyone. So who really has this right to sell something like this? So I think there is the government not a night watchman and supposed to be guarding that land for the people.
Boundaries have become more and more constrictive in the last 100 years. Very few people are probably aware of this, but before the First World War, there was no such thing as a no-fly zone. There was no such thing. People could fly anywhere, to any country or whatever. There was no such thing as a no-fly zone, and you didn't need special permission and all that. I believe you didn't even need visas at that time, if I'm correct. You'll have to look it up. It was only after that this happened, and then after that things like the restrictions moved into immigration and all that. And right now things are extremely restricted. Things are so restricted now that there are certain things even within the city which weren't there before, like your vegetarian society.
So isn't communal ownership, communal sharing of these spaces perhaps the way to go?
The government takes advantage of communities, castes, minorities, and divides them, corrals them, and it's for vote banks to do that. So probably that has filtered into the public consciousness, and we've become like this. Again, I will lay this at the government's door.
Isn't there any counterbalancing force you think in society opposed to the government? Like, so you have government which is force and legal and monopolized force. What
I
else
think the
could be?
solution could very well lie in what you were saying about this whole feeling of getting back a certain sense of community. You know, because if you look at Bandra, for example, which is probably where you research, there was this great sense of community in the old days. So, you know, if someone were to go out of the country, people would celebrate that. You know, and everything happened at a local level. The community took sort of responsibility for the well-being and the prosperity, and that money was brought back into the community. So I think similarly, even with ALMs, you know, taking responsibility for your own territory and your own this thing, I think that might just be the way forward. But
So more decentralized.
more
forms of
decentralized, more
governance.
local, you know.
Like the
you know.
panchayat system, which seems
Yeah.
to be working quite
Right,
well.
right. It's very Gandhian thought, you know,
Right.
that, you know, you start at the grassroots level and make every little unit self-sufficient, you know. So I think that would be the solution.
My experiences with the community in Dharavi Island, they are not passive masses, you know, sort of lying back waiting for somebody to rescue them. They're a group of really highly intelligent, vigilant people who are perfectly capable of you know,
Fighting the battles.
fighting their battles. I mean, they've been successful. I mean, they brought an SEZ. I mean, SEZ was like this big giant troubling Asia, and they brought it down to 110 hectares. I mean, wow, good for them. For the longest time, the bridge was on hold. So many battles they won, and they are a perfectly vigilant, intelligent community. What I think of it more in terms of is collaboration, which is a very different thing from protectionism. Protectionism is very insulting. I mean, that's assuming that they don't really, they're not really capable of thinking for themselves, which is so not true. So I think it's more of collaborating with all these different bodies that we have put in place, rather than anybody protecting anybody else. Which
Yeah, I think so. I think basically I get a common sense that all of you are in terms of decentralization, communities being empowered by themselves, collaborating with each other to win their own
Absolutely.
rights,
Yeah.
having the government completely stay
Yeah.
out unless there is a necessity to adjudicate between
Yeah.
Right.
kind of conflicts. So if that is
Absolutely.
perhaps a comment.
Right.
So that's a good, I think that's a really great note to end the session with, because here we have artists who share a common understanding of the kind of work they want to do and the kind of message they want to send out. So I'm glad that we've been able to arrive at a nice consensus there. So thank you very much for being one of the audience and patiently listening to us. I hope it has been useful and valuable. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone.